Um, and today we're going to do the live stream for Ramsey Avenue Swell. And so just let me know if you can hear okay, the guitar is all right, if there's anything's if there's any distortion on the guitar or anything like that. And we'll get rolling. There was a lot of good questions about some specific things for Ramsey Avenue Swell, and I thought that this month, that for this tune, I might actually start by talking a little more about improvising than about arranging, or at least maybe talk a little bit about arranging, but a lot of what the questions were about were kind of more improvisation questions. So let me go over a few basics about what to do in terms of arranging, and then we'll get into some soloing ideas. Because this tune in particular seems to me more attuned for kind of stretching out and improvising. Oh, sorry. Just realized it's disappearing here. A little bit more about the improvising than about the arrangement, because it's a pretty long form already. It's got that vamp built into it. And the vamp itself provides a certain amount of structure that some of the 8-bar tunes that we've done, like St. James, don't have. So it's 12 bars plus this vamp, or is it? Yeah, it's 12 bars. I had to stop and count. It's 12 bars plus a vamp. So it's already, 20 bars long? So that's pretty, that's got a lot. And it's got the whole shape of the blues, plus it's got this sort of interlude built into it. So you really could do just, if you just took a pass through the fundamental version, the vamp, the embellished version, the vamp, and one chorus of improvising, maybe two, you could either just kind of wrap it up on the vamp, or you could even, if you took one more pass through the melody at the end, you'd have a pretty complete tune. So I don't know, and because it's a slower tune, I don't know that it lends itself as much to the stop time and some of the other things that we've been talking about. It doesn't really need an intro because it's got a vamp. In fact, when I was playing just now, I was using the vamp as the intro, basically. And so the tune kind of arranges itself in a way. And as I've been thinking about sort of the logic of how we're working on things here, I've been realizing that really, I've been noticing, first of all, that as people post their lessons, people post their videos of what they've been doing with the lessons, that a lot of people are doing, they'll do the fundamental and then the embellished as kind of like a way to pair them and have some build, which I think makes a lot of sense. And so just the idea that if you can work out an intro, then you can have intro, fundamental version, embellished version, a bit of improvising, maybe a shout chorus if it calls for that, and back out. That's going to make a pretty complete arrangement. So as far as the elements that we've gone over generally have been like intro or intro / outro and vamp, shout chorus, and then maybe a stop time idea. So let me just look at a couple ways you could apply that, and then get into some more ideas about improvising. And if you've got other questions that you want to post as we go, that is fine with me too. So the intro, if you just grab that vamp as the intro, it's really just going from a 1 chord, an E7 chord, to an A7 chord. And it's really also like a very, it's not necessarily a very bright sounding E chord, right? Because right, It's just this blues lick on top. And I mentioned in the embellished version how you could swap out different blues licks in that spot. You've basically got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, which you can fill up. So anything that works, or really almost, I guess, from the and of 1 or from the 2, 2, 3 and of 4 and 1. And so you can start to vary it, even if you're using it as an intro. And these are just very simple blues scale licks. Root, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, or 5 here, flat 7, and root. And again, it's kind of just taking that idea of like a little rhythmic container. We've got this one spot, and just why not find some other licks that fit that same rhythmic shape? 1, 2, 3 and of 4 and 1. So 1, 2, 3 and 3 and of 4 and a 1. Right? And then you can just start taking those elements and turning them around. I did one that just now that was like a really repetitive one. Which is something I always forget about. It's like you can repeat yourself, right? And sounds great. Just flat 5, 5, flat 7. You can also, once you've got that idea, you can go elsewhere, right? You can go down. Or up. Right, just over the root. So that's just that piece of the vamp, right? And then of course the chords, we're going from E7 to A, but keeping the E in the bass, right? So you could go up, and here's kind of where that dominant dozen grid of chords starts to come into play. Like if you know your voicings on the middle strings, like the fourth, third, and second string, and I've been meaning for like a really long time to make a whole grid of just the A chords for the dominant dozen, and now maybe I finally will since I'm talking about it. But if you can go from here, A7 to A, then you can go up. And you can go to just an A major chord, or you can go to an A7 chord. Might sound a little weird over the E, but you can try it. So, or go to the A in the bass, but... Or you could go to, you could find the next E7 chord. All right, so here's the third and the seventh and the root of E. So now you've got a couple different ways to do this. And whatever the next one is, that's a little bright for what we're doing. The fifth, the flat 7, and the third. That's the next inversion up of E7. But you could go from there to here with the root, the fifth, and the flat 7 of A. go from the E9, the third, the flat 7, and the 9. And go up, or go down, or even, if you want to get super jazzy, because now we're going from an E9, third, flat 7 and 9 of E, down to the flat 7, the third, and the 13, right? So we got a common tone on top. And then you can start to put things in between that. Anyway, I could go on, obviously. I have just gone on a lot about that. But so the idea is, even something as simple as the vamp has all this potential, right, to do stuff with it, because you got these two elements you're working with. It's the change from E to A, played over the low E, which is a pedal, just like one thing that keeps going. And then you've got the licks. And if you can come up with a few licks to swap, and you can come up with a few different ways to voice the chords, now that section is sort of infinitely expandable, right? You don't have to limit the vamp to 8 bars, right? You could, your entire solo could be just the vamp, right? You could come out of it. And so now I'm using like a shorthand. Instead of grabbing the 3-note chord, third, flat 7, and root, I'm just grabbing the tritone, I want to say this right so I don't screw it up, the third and the flat 7 of E, down to the flat 7 and third of A. So, and then you can start to pay attention to the relationship between the different licks so that the individual licks have a call and response quality. So right, so there's a little interplay between the first lick you play and the second lick you play. So, so the vamp has this very open-ended quality to it. Now, it's true that a vamp can get to be too open-ended. So, even with a certain amount of structure, but then you've got a place to bail out to, and you don't have to bail out to the beginning of the tune, right? You could be in the middle of the vamp. And what does that take you back into? The vamp. But the point is, the vamp comes from the A chord. I mean, the turnaround comes from the A chord, the F sharp. I mean, you get into the F sharp from the A. So another way to think about it is to kind of build up a little form that is the solo form. That's the vamp for as long as you have ideas. And then you bail out into the turnaround. So you're going along. Let's say you've been doing this for a while, and then you can either vamp more, or you can use the vamp as a way to get you back to the beginning of the tune again. And finally, that could be your form for your solo, could be more structured on purpose. Like you could just do 2 times through. Right, that could be your form, and you could just repeat that. So like a couple, E to A, the turnaround, and then around and around like that. And then you never have to take a solo on the form of the blues, which, not that you were trying to avoid that, but it's another way to approach the tune and to think about treating the tune so it doesn't sound the same as any other blues you might play on, right? And so this is a way of thinking about arranging in the sense that there's plenty of possibilities within the tune already. So here the idea is, what can we make of that to create a more flexible, kind of open-ended experience instead of feeling like super hemmed in by like, here comes the chords, every 8 bars, we got to go around again. This gives you some room to kind of open it up and yet still not end up, in outer space. I think it was Dickie Betts. There's a great quote from one of the Allman biographies, I guess, later in the band's career, like in the 80s or 90s, where he was just yelling at somebody like, I'm just a cowboy, damn it, I ain't going to play none of that space music. So you don't want to get too spacey necessarily, at least if you're jamming with Dickie Betts, I guess. So anyway, that's a few things about the arrangement and just kind of a different way of thinking about arranging than we've done on some of the other tunes. So let me, I'm just going to pause there for a second. And if you've got questions about any of that, drop them in the chat. And then I have really 3 kind of specific things that I'm going to get to in the next part of the stream. About practicing and using scales, Freddie Green voicings, a little more about that since people asked about that relative to the improvisation exercises that I presented on that. And then a little bit about kind of applying chord theory to voicings in terms of like finding the names of notes that you're playing up the neck, because that's something that has been coming up a lot lately, and so I just have a couple ideas about that to kind of float out there, see if it makes sense to you and if that helps. So this is me just checking the chat, making sure this mic is on, and seeing if anybody has questions about the stuff I was just talking about, and if not, then I will just leap into the next topic. It's empty. So sad. All right, it's very quiet out there. Just making sure everything's still working. Stream is healthy. Okay. Okay, I will get into the next thing, which is, there was a question from Lloyd about how to practice and use scales. And he sort of just gave a specific example of, how to use a pentatonic scale. And so what I thought I would do is go over a bit of the scales you might use improvising on this arrangement and just spell out a little bit of what your choices are and why those are your choices. So, first of all, there are 2 main scales everybody learns when they're playing blues, which are the major pentatonic scale and the minor pentatonic scale. And those 2 scales will get you a lot of mileage, and also knowing that there's a relationship between the blues scale and the major pentatonic scale. And then there's the question of, well, what about the major scale, and what about the swing scale, which is a term that I kind of made up for stuff that I'm sure other people have their names for it. But I had a few questions about, like, could I go over that again at some point as well. So if you're playing an E, and here's an E root, then if you just sort of use your ear to hear do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, then you get an E major scale like this. And if you look at it going up, just up the E string, the low E string, or the high E string, then it's easy to see and it's easy to hear, and you can see this combination of the fact that sometimes you're jumping 2 frets and sometimes you're only jumping 1 fret. I'm not going to get too into that right now. There is a whole set of theory videos in the core content that I recommend you check out if you haven't yet, because I do go over a lot of this from scratch. But in practical terms, we have this major scale. And if you take out 2 of the notes, and you just have the root and the second and the third and the fifth and the sixth note, right? And all I'm doing is counting from the root. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, root. This is the first note of the scale, the second note, the third note, the fourth note, the fifth note, the sixth note, the seventh note, the eighth note up from the root. So if we leave out the fourth note and leave out the seventh note, then we get this, which, speaking of the Allman Brothers, right? It's that bright sound. And in fact, that song actually has the fourth in it, so that is kind of a bad example. But that's one of the scales that is kind of available to you for playing blues. The other one is if you go up the notes like this, if you took the third note and you lowered it a half step, that's called flatting a note. If you take the note that would ordinarily be in that do, re, mi scale and you bring it down a half step, then this is now called not the third, but the flat third or the minor third. And so if we use the root and the flat third and the fourth and the fifth, and then we jump up to not the seventh, but the flat seventh, now we have another pentatonic scale, meaning another 5-note scale, because penta means 5, like pentagram. All right, so now we have a minor pentatonic scale, which we can play over here. Here's the root, here's the flat third, here's the fourth, here's the fifth, here's the flat seventh, and here's the root. And if we add in one more note, and here's the fifth. If we lower that, then we get the flat fifth. And so now we've got a scale, if we include that, and we keep the fifth, then we have the flat fifth also. Now we have the root, the flat third, the fourth, the flat fifth, the fifth, and the flat seventh, and the root. And if you go to the dictionary and you look up blues, it will tell you that it involves playing the blue notes, which are identified in classical music or like by people using classical terminology to talk about American music, as the blue notes are the flat third, the flat five, and the flat seven. Right? So this scale has all the blue notes you could want, and so it's called the blues scale. Root, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, flat 7. So when you do this, you're playing out of the blues scale. You're playing flat 5 to 5 to flat 7, and then 4, flat 3, and root. And it feels like it's gone somewhere, partly because of what it's doing rhythmically, but partly because it's landing on the root. So one thing about learning scales is that just playing scales doesn't always sound great. It's what you do with them rhythmically and where you land them that makes them sound good. So if you're beginning to improvise on this tune, and let's just say you want to play some new licks on the vamp like I was talking about before. That's why I was stressing the idea of like kind of a rhythmic container of saying, well, if you know this lick, that lick does a certain thing rhythmically. 1, 2, it starts after the downbeat. 2, 3, and has a little triplet feel. Root, flat 7, and then it lands on the root on the downbeat of the next measure. 1, 2, 3, and a 4, and 1. So that feels satisfying. So if that feels satisfying, you can use it as a model for other licks. So once you learn this scale, it won't necessarily sound great if you just play through that scale while you keep the bass going, which in and of itself is a bit of a trick, right? To be able to play this kind of stuff. But all the exercises, or a lot of the improvisation exercises that I've put into the lessons, are designed to take that leap from these are the notes I know work to these are examples of how these notes work over this progression with the bass doing its thing at the same time. So it's the idea of modeling things rhythmically and in terms of the landing point. So if you know the scale and you know the rhythm of 1, 2, 3, and a 4, and 1, then you take the scale and try to find different things that fit that rhythm and land on the root at the end. 1, 2, 3, and a 4, and 1. And then you try to put that over the bass. And that involves all that horizontal 3-step stuff of going like, the bass is doing this, the fingers are doing 1, pinch, pinch, and pinch, and pinch. And so that's a next step. And then after that, it's like, well, how are you going to be able to choose that lick or some other lick, right? Before you start worrying about being able to just completely make stuff up on the fly, your next step is to be able to work out 3 or 4 of those licks on purpose while you're practicing so that you can then alternate between and once you've done that a bunch, then you will get to a point where you can kind of incorporate that phrasing and incorporate those notes on the fly. But working them out one by one is a very good intermediary step to start being able to do that and to start absorbing the kinds of things you need to be able to do to improvise. So the thing about blues and the blues progression is that the blues scale is very resilient, and it will work over all the chords in the progression to some extent. So it'll work over E. It'll work over over F sharp. Because it's a very sort of abstract scale. It doesn't really spell out a lot of stuff. It doesn't have like the major third of the one chord in it. So it's not telling you this is the sound. It's just the sound that sounds, some of the notes sound more right than others, but that's kind of what creates a sense of tension. It's like, okay, that's the flat 7. That's a funny note. There's the third. That's going away from what's right. But because you're ultimately resolving back to E, those funkier notes that don't really quite belong still kind of help you resolve back to where you're going. So if played with the right phrasing and enough conviction, you can get away with almost anything applying the blues scale over all these chords. Getting into playing more specifically over each chord is a whole other thing and worthy of a whole other discussion. And we've talked about it some in the past, but I also want to talk about chord voicing. So I'm going to leave that there for now and see if there are any questions. And if you are posting a question, I don't see any. So it could be that everything I'm saying is so fantastically, awesomely interesting that nobody has any questions. But that does not seem likely. So, so I'm a little concerned because I want to make sure that if there are questions, they're getting answered. But it looks like everything is still streaming and everything is still happening. So I guess everything is just amazingly fascinating and not a problem because I don't see any new questions in the chat. So I'm going to keep going. Even though deep down I really do believe people are saying things. Let's just see. Are people leaving questions? It is very quiet here in the chat. Just checking. Okay, onward. So, I talked about Freddie Green chords in the improvisation exercises. The idea of being able to climb your way through these chords and use them in a kind of call and response way. And a few people had questions about that. Ben and Bruce and Stephen all posted about that. So I want to talk about that just a little bit. Again, the E in this tune is a little bit of sort of a potentially a little bit darker than a full-on super bright E chord at times. But we do have this bass line in here, the embellished version. So we can use sounds like this. And let's just look at the first 4 bars where we've got E to A, and then 2 bars of E going up to A, right? So that's the first 4 bars of the blues. That's the first 4 bars of this tune. So, really. But the idea is making small answers so that when you're improvising, you're not just having this kind of stark, empty, steady bass going on all the time. So now I'm using phrasing that starts before the downbeat. So 1, 2, 3, 1. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And so something as simple as that, again, that's your rhythmic container. All the licks start on the and of 3, I think. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then land on the downbeat of the next measure. So how many can you come up with? That lands on the 5th, but that's almost as good. Blues licks again, right? So just different ways to do that. And then answer with 1 to 4. And so what I'm doing is I'm playing this 3-note chord that's an inversion, meaning a different arrangement of the pitches of the chord. Not this order of the notes, but this order of basically almost the same notes. Here's the 3rd, the root, and the 5th, the V. So, and then there's A7, right? So, and this A7 is like a fingerstyle open string version of this voicing that like a jazz rhythm guitar player would play. So, there's my opening phrase, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4 and so that phrase, 3, 4 and, is taking me over to the 4 chord, where I'm kind of free to do what I want at that point, but I've had this kind of chordal answer. 3, 4, and then on the and, the fingers are going to the top of the A chord, these guys are picking on the end of 4, and then the bass comes in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and so we can have anything at the beginning. And we've got more time on the A because we've got, when we get back to the E. No, what am I saying? Yeah, we've got more time to play into the next chord when we're on the A because we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. The idea being we want to find a way to hit the chord when we get back to the E. So here, grabbing the melody that we're landing on, grabbing the bass, grabbing a note in between just to kind of fill things out. The 3rd right here on the 1st fret of the 3rd string. So on the A, and then maybe a longer chord answer. The E, B7, which connects you up to G diminished, which connects you up to E over G sharp, and then back to B7. And again, this is just fooling around and killing time on the 1 chord. And one or two of the improvisation lessons go into more detail about how this works and what's going on. So I won't repeat that here. But so now we've got short answer, longer A phrase, landing on the E, and now from the beat 3 of measure 3 into measure 4, and then a pickup phrase into A, maybe in the beginning of bar 5, right? So we've got our spots, and so we could do this, which is 1 to 4. But we could also do this, which is also 1 to 4. So that gives us a different possibility. And now, again, instead of going, we could go and then pass through the 4 chord to get to the 1 chord, like that. And that gets us to the 4 chord. So, again, the chords have kind of a rhythmic container as well. We know we're playing from beat 3 of bar 3 all the way until we get to the downbeat of measure 5. And so that's another thing we can try to fill up. So what else can we do? That's a little more exotic, but we've started off on beat 3 with 2 beats of E, and then 4, which is just really, if we can do this, E, A, E, then we can do this. And so we're going to go, and so that's another possibility for getting from 1 over to 4. And yeah, we're playing the 4 in the middle of the first line, in the middle of bar 3, but we're not really giving it away because it's just it's like this. It's just 1 to 4 to 1, 4 to 1, like that. So that gives us a way to think about doing this call and response between the single notes and the chords. So it's looking at the chords as another thing to practice improvising, right? You want to have 2 or 3 different ways to handle measures 3 and 4 of the chords. Or haven't talked about it, but you could have that way. I forget what I did before. Oh, I did. And that gets you there. So this is just one more version of the idea that improvising doesn't always literally mean you have to make up stuff for 12 bars at a time, right? Because we're improvising with single notes and we're improvising with chords. So in that first 4 bars, we're playing one short phrase and then we're playing one long phrase. Both of them lead into the downbeat. So a short phrase, a short pickup, or a short phrase into the downbeat, and 4 and 1, and then a long one. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So you have a little collection of short licks that lead into the downbeat, a little collection of longer licks that lead into the downbeat, a little collection of chords that get you from 1 to 4, and then a little collection of moves that get you from 1 to 4 in a longer way. So again, short and long. Right? But all doing the same function. This lick is leading into the downbeat. That lick is leading into the downbeat. One does it in a long way, one does it in a short way. This gets you from 1 to 4 in a quick way. But they function the same way. It's how are you getting from 1 to 4. So that is a few thoughts about the Freddie Green chords. And I still see no comments, which is kind of freaking me out. I'm just going to be optimistic about the idea that everybody is still seeing and hearing what's going on, even though my optimism is beginning to fade. Very strange. Okay, well, just make sure everything's still going here, which it is. Cool. So let us continue. Yeah. Okay. Well, something is clearly not working with the chat. But I will just, so I'm sorry that I'm not taking questions because I am not seeing them and I don't know how to fix that. But the stream is still going. And we'll be doing more live streams this month. So if you're not able to ask a question right now, I'll be going over some of these topics in more detail and we'll be able to circle back and talk about things if you didn't get to ask a question that you wanted to. Let's now talk a little bit about, just an idea that keeps coming up, which is, I think of it as the how do you know the names of what you're playing question. And this is basically the question of, well, if you're up here, how do you know this is the 7th and the root and the 5th of the chord you're on? And if you need to, how do you know that this is D and E and B? And just through the conversations that I've been having so far with people on the forum, I never really thought about it that specifically before, but I do really think about it much more in terms of the intervals that I'm playing than in terms of the actual note names. It always takes me like an extra fraction of a second to go like, oh, yeah, that's D. Okay, yeah, that's E. No, that's got to be B, right? Whereas if I'm just grabbing a chord, it's really easy to just think, okay, that's the 5th and the 7th and the 3rd, because somehow some part of my brain just goes, yeah, that's what they are. But you can put that information into your brain. It is not magic. And one way you can start to do it is by learning triads on the top 3 strings, but not just learning them as shapes, but calling out the names of the intervals of the chords as you're playing them, which you also will not necessarily be able to do right away. You have to put this information into your brain in a very stepwise kind of way. So, and if you want, there is a way you can also combine this with learning technique, which is you can put on a metronome and you can do the steady bass and you can go through these exercises as fingerstyle blues exercises that are also teaching you what the notes are. And so as you go up, if you limit yourself to the top 3 strings, to this one set of strings, and there are other sets of strings you can limit yourself to, but for this exercise, top 3 strings, we're just going to play triads of E, which means it's got one of each of the notes in the chord, the root, the third, and the fifth. So going back to this, the root, the third, and the fifth note up from the root. So the root, the third, and the fifth are scale steps relative to E. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But when you pull them out as just those notes, the root, the third, and the fifth, and then spread them out across the guitar, you get a chord. Now the notes aren't always in the same order anymore. In this case, we've got the third, and then we've got the fifth, and then we've got the root. And if we go up on each string from the note we're on to the next note in the chord, we get the next shape, the next, also called the next inversion. And this is, if we go from the third to the fifth, and from the fifth to the root, and from the root to the third, we get this shape. And then if we go from here, from the fifth to the root, and the root to the third, and the third to the fifth, we get this shape. And wouldn't you know, if you kept going, we'd get this shape. We'd be back at the beginning, but an octave higher. So really, these 3 shapes. Now, the first thing you can do is learn those shapes and just start being able to play them as shapes on the downbeat over the steady bass. And just if you can just get to the chord on each next one, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 1, 2. And then also come back down. And then you can do things, if you can get to that, then you can do things to make it a little harder. You can go twice as fast every 2 beats. There it is. Right? Or you can start jumping around. Right? But once you've got those shapes where you can just grab them, now comes the part of learning what are you playing. And now is where you, if you haven't put the metronome yet on yet. Now, you play through the notes of each inversion. So, and you name the intervals, right? The number of the note you're playing. So you say third, fifth, root, fifth, third. Then you go to the next one. Fifth, root, third, root, fifth, root, third, fifth, root, third. And it's super meticulous, and it'll make your head hurt a little bit, probably. But you're putting this information into your head, and you're doing it in time. And your brain, you're basically, like once you can play the chords, to go like this with your hand is not hard. But to say the names of the notes at that pace, the names of the intervals, root, third, fifth, third, root, fifth, root, third, that's hard. That's hard for your head. So you're actually practicing, you're training your brain more than your hands at this point. And if you do want to know the note names, you can do the same process. G sharp, B, E, B, E, G sharp, root, E, G sharp, B, right? And it's always harder to go backwards and down than it is to go forwards and up. So B, G sharp, E, G sharp, E, B, E, B, G sharp, right? And so then you want to be able to play some E blues. Now you're just trying to make those triads sound good. And there's other steps you can take beyond that, of course, because you can start to say, well, if I know where the root is and I know the flat 7 is always 2 frets below the root, because I watched David's theory videos and he said so, then you can take a chord like this and go, oh, well, there's the root. The flat 7 is always 2 frets below the root. So if I take this chord and I change this note, well, now I have an E7 chord. Cool. That's better than this, maybe, for playing blues, right? And so you can start to adjust the chords. You can say, oh, if I know that the only difference between a major triad and a minor triad is that you flat the third to make a minor triad, then you can take this chord, and if you know this is the third because you've been going 5, root 3, root 5 for a week, and you go, oh, the third has to go down 1 fret. That's what it means to flat the third. No, well, there's a D minor, there's an E minor chord. Cool. Well, what if I do it here? This is an E chord, and I know this is root and third and fifth. And if I take the third and lower it a half step, I get this. So now I've got this. So if you want to get out of open position, playing an E minor, now you've got 2 more chords that you can connect up. And if you also know that the blues scale is the root and the flat third, and the fourth, the flat 5, and the 5, plus the flat 7, then maybe some part of your brain will go, oh, the root, the flat third, and the fifth, aren't I already playing all of those? Here's the root, here's the flat third, and here's the fifth. Ah, well, if I want the blues scale, then I just have to find a way to add in the fourth and the flat 5. And I've got all these other notes already. And here's the flat 7. Okay, well now I know where to go to get licks. And if I'm down here, here's the fifth and the root and the flat third. So above the third is the fourth and the flat 5. And here's the flat 7 right below the root. So position, up in the nosebleed frets, just from knowing a couple of things about triads. So, and notice that at no point did I stop and think, okay, well, like the third of E is G sharp, and so I'm going to make G sharp flatter, so that means taking away the sharp. Now I've got a G natural. Now I'm thinking about this shape is an E shape, this is the third of that shape, the flat third is a fret lower. That'll work in any key. If I'm playing in B flat, not that I would be, but I'm sorry, in C. And I end up going up here. I don't have to relearn, well, this is C and this is E and this is G, although that's not a bad idea. All I need to know is this is the third, and if I want to flat it, I go down. Now there's C minor, and now add in the fourth and the flat 5 and the flat 7. And now I've got C licks for days. So there's a relationship between the chords and the scales, and there's a relationship between knowing the intervals that you're playing and where they come from out of the basic major scale idea. So that's a way to start thinking about knowing what you're playing and to start thinking about how the scales you know fit into the chords you're playing and how those fit into the chord progression. So that is what I came here to say. We'll say it one more time. I'm really sorry there does not seem to be any chat working, which is very sad. because one of my favorite things is to answer the questions that actually come in during the session. But if you're watching this later, you can post questions underneath, and in one of the subsequent streams this month, I will try to get to some of the questions that maybe people didn't get to ask today, or I'll try to answer them just in text underneath the lesson that we've got right here. So thanks for being here. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry you were silenced by the technology, but those are some ideas about working through Ramsey Avenue Swell, and maybe I'll play through it one more time before we get out of here. Just try to apply some of these ideas. All right. Leave your questions down below if you got them. I'll try to get to some of them somehow, and I'll see you in the next live stream.